这个各自解读的方程式，就让全民上了很多的统计学，每个人都是统计学博士，现在跟SARS期跟那个Kuomintang病期间，每个人都是这个防疫学博士一样。
Taiwanese presidents can nominate leaders to 4 out of the 5 branches of government. Vice presidents don't do much, so sometimes they're replaced in re-elections. Prior to 1996, each election usually had only one candidate from the Chinese Nationalist Party KMT, or Team Blue. This changed because of the 1986 formation of Democratic Progressive Party, or Team Green, public demonstrations, and the ruling party's willingness to reform. In 2019, Team White, or the Taiwan People's Party, was formed trying to disrupt the status quo. They promised major constitutional reforms for more checks and balances. Here are the 3 presidential candidates of the January 2024 election: Lai, Hou, and Ke. Because Team Green was leading the polls and Team White attracts more young voters than both major parties, support was growing for a blue-white alliance. But the power dynamic is that in the 2022 midterm elections, Blues won 14 out of 22 magistrate or mayor elections, while White only won 1. A blue-white alliance is possible if someone were to drop out and concede to be the vice presidential running mate of the other person. The talks were contentious.
蓝白也是国民党讲的，我说好啊，你要合作，那不然要讲怎么选是最有效率、成功率最高的。不是你想选嘛？你不好让给你选，你也不会上啊，对不对
Eventually,
因为是这样的，如果在统计上就是说不能证明说你们是不一样的，因为统计上还是有误差范围的所以如果就算是我们赢了，那也没有达到说统计的误差范围之外，你知道的这种差距的胜利，我们还是愿意当副手。
The November 15 cross-party meeting was brokered by former President Ma and joined by the KMT party chair. The 4 met without aides or cameras for 2 hours. Ma, as a mere witness, summarized the 6 articles of their agreement. They were to look at both independent and internal polling within a 10-day window. For each poll, the 2 parties agree that if it goes beyond statistical errors, the winner shall get a point. If it is within the margin of error, the whole Ke ticket shall get a point. Media clarified that each poll shall ask the same voters 2 questions. Both shall include a green option, but the order of the blue-white ticket will be different. The articles also specify that in a coalition government, Team White shall focus on checks and balances, while Team Blue shall focus on development. This is why Blue thinks the articles were fair.
在10月15号的协商的过程当中，两党的共识的是，因为我们无力再坚持政党支持度，而改成讨论民调的逻辑的立场。所以不是民众党让国民党，而是双方各退一步。我们退让在坚持政党实力，这是彼此达成的协议，不是谁让谁，这个焦点不能变红变塞断，这一起学习。
In Taiwan, parties nominate their presidential candidates mostly or entirely from telephone polls. So at the time, it appeared to be an agreement in good faith. The 3 experts examined 9 polls. 3 of them were rejected by Team White. 1 required subscribers to actively participate in the poll for a prize draw, and 2 of them only considered landlines. Here's Team White explaining it in detail.
那我们今天蓝色的线是我们的人口分布，但是我们这个橘色的线是今天我们有电话抽样，这是我从一个民调的详细的资料所得出来一个结果。我们可以看到，在20到29岁差了将近3倍，所以换句话来讲，你用纯市化去做，那你今天要乘上3作为一个加权。当你一做加权，你的抽样误差就会变大。看到，如果说今天我用混合式的方式，是不是就非常的接近了？好，所以因此，如果说我们单纯用市化，那就会变成我需要很大的一个加权，因为它并不符合我们的一个常态的一种状况，人口的分布。
For the 6 remaining polls, Blue says it's 5-1 in their favor by comparing the tickets against each other. but white claims a 3-3 tie based on how much each ticket lead the greens. It was time for a math debate. Poll numbers are different from a prediction of election results due to voter turnout, people voting differently from what they claim, and certain voters who won't be sampled due to time availability or telephone access. If each supporter is assigned the number 1 and each non-supporter 0, then by adding up everyone's number and dividing by the sample size, we arrive at the sample proportion of support. So it is an average or mean. We want to use a sample to estimate the population or true mean and evaluate how good it is. This introduces statistical error, which refers to the uncertainty that arises when we cannot ask each of the 20 million registered voters. From the central limit theorem, the mean of large samples very closely follow a normal distribution. Suppose a poll asks n people, of whom percentage p supports a particular ticket. These heuristics allow the normal distribution to be appropriate for sample to population calculations. The polls we'll be using will have n greater than 1,000. Normal distributions allow us to relate sample mean to the population mean. Narrow and tall curves are more reliable, such as when we increase the sample size. This means larger random samples have less error. When we change the percentage of support, we are more certain about performance of very popular or unpopular candidates than we are of those near the middle. Blue Party reveals that errors were discussed in their meeting.
那什么叫做统计误差？当天我们在谈话的过程当中，因为我自己本身在学校也有任教，那我特别把所谓统计误差，从它的公式1.96乘上开根号拍乘上1减拍除上 n， 我都已经跟柯主席做一个明确的说明。
The square root expression is called the standard error or standard deviation, depending on the context. It is the average distance away from the mean, while giving more weight to outliers. For normal distributions, 95% of measurements are within 1.96 standard deviations of the mean. We expect the 95% confidence interval to have a 95% chance of containing the population mean. This so-called empirical rule is a property of all normal distributions, and it makes error comparisons easy. Team Blue wants to directly compare blue-white against white-blue tickets. Here are all 6 polls. Now Blue simply added the two 95% CIs and checked whether the difference is within that. It makes sense. It's a useful rule of thumb, but it's not statistically sound. In comparison, Team White rejected this idea of comparing intervals.
记得哦，这是平均值，不是范围哦。这个就叫做 regional rejection， 就是有显著的差异。我们从来也不会把它两个的范围去做比较。OK， 所以这个东西我不能说完全是错，但是问题这是有疑问的。
It is reasonable to see which combo can attract more green voters. But because errors could compound, error propagation rules say 3 subtractions should have higher uncertainties than 1 subtraction. So both sides were to some extent wrong. Here's how to do it more correctly. It's a legal process. In court, the accused is presumed innocent. Evidence of guilt is presented to a judge or jury. They decide if the case was proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In statistics, we assume the null hypothesis. We calculate a test statistic. If the test statistic is beyond the threshold, we reject the null hypothesis. Suppose the true population means are capital P sub x and P sub y, while the samples provided us with lowercase p sub x and p sub y. Our null hypothesis is that the two population means are equal. We want to see if their difference is statistically different from 0. The difference of two normal distributions is also a normal distribution. The formula for propagating the error is this. For now, we ignore the last term, as do the textbooks. In this case, this formula for standard error, which measures the average distance from the mean, is reminiscent of the distance formula from the Pythagorean theorem. Customarily, we also pool the two proportions as we assume they are equal, but that only changed the test statistic here by about 0.02. At a p equals to 0.05 significance level, if the difference is more than 1.96 times the propagated error, then we reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the two population means are statistically different. Crunching the numbers, two polls had a test statistic greater than 1.96, so we can reject the null hypothesis only for those two polls. In particular, for poll E, the two 95% CIs differ by about 10%. But using this proper method, the overlap of the propagated errors is less than 5%. So that's why blues said 5-1 using the rule of thumb, while it's actually 4-2. If we are to apply this methodology to Team White's criteria, then we also get 4-2. It is in White's interest not to propagate errors, while it is in Blue's interest to do so. But that's not an excuse for bad statistics. Neither side wanted to yield to be the vice presidential candidate, as that could be not only devastating for down-ballot elections, but also perilous for their respective party. The parties have very different age groups in their voter base, so it's not as simple as uniting behind a change in power. In addition, Team White attracts both green and blue supporters. A hypothetically successful blue-white alliance, especially with blue dictating policies, would have given them better chances, but would not have necessarily won. Ke has amassed over 1 million subscribers here on YouTube, mostly from 2023. Third parties historically failed in Taiwan because they were unable to build a platform. But with this many subscribers, there will be an ecosystem of channels targeting the same viewers and cultivating a community. Successful new parties add uncertainties to regional geopolitics. Only in recent years has the US pulled South Korea, Vietnam, and the Philippines to her side. A growing Team White could sway the US influence over the first island chain. Most Taiwanese people want to maintain the status quo in the cross-strait relations with China, as Taiwan had for at least half a century. In this process, Taiwan is open to new ideas in politics, so she is more equipped to deal with changes in the people, the economics, and the world. Hope I was able to contribute a fresh yet balanced perspective on Taiwan and that you learned a thing or two about polls. Please help me by changing the number of likes, comments, and shares so that they're statistically different from 0. Team White was spot on in that blue-white and white-blue supports are non-independent, but rather highly correlated. Hence, the errors are more likely to cancel, and we can quantify that using rho, even though Team White did not. The Greek letter rho represents the linear correlation of the populations. In samples, it can be approximated by R, Pearson's correlation coefficients. R and rho range from -1 to 1. 0 means no correlation, random data, and extreme values mean perfectly linear relations. You probably have used R squared, the coefficient of determination. Within the context of linear correlation, both R's mean the same thing. Accounting for correlation, using Blue's method, we can see the 4-2 is now 3-3. But how good of an estimate is 0.76? To answer that question, we can rerun our trial procedure from before. For n equals to 6 polls, this is not large enough to use normal distribution, so we have to use students' t-distribution. We find the p-value is only 0.08, which fails to reject the null hypothesis at a p equals to 0.05 significance level. Here, 0.76 is statistically the same as 0, because we have only 6 polls, or 6 data points. A good estimate usually requires hundreds of points. We were unable to show that they are not independent. Similarly, you cannot prove that Taiwan is not an independent country.